Hello and welcome to Thai TV. My name is Andreas Andersson, reporting from a rather snowy Stockholm, Sweden. Today I will be tying a pattern that's not one of mine. It's actually a Feather Gamechanger. The pattern is from Plain Chocolate, an American guide and fly designer person. Really cool pattern. It's built up on a system of shanks, ranging. The one I will be tying today will be a 10mm shank, a small back hook. There will be a Ahrex hooks SA 280, which is a short shank hook that really does a really good job of holding on to fish once you stick it. Love that. It's from the saltwater series, but I use it both for salt and freshwater. After that, it's going to be a 20mm shank or a 15mm shank and a 20mm shank, finished off with a bigger version of that same hook, the 280 in a size 1. The reason why I will be using a small hook in the back is because I want to be able to use this pattern for our sea-run brown trout in the archipelago, both here in Stockholm and also further south if possible. So the fly itself is well, you get a ton of movement. I think a lot of people who are fishing flies has heard of the Gamechanger now. He does it in a few different variations. The original was a all synthetic fly that you had to spend about 4.5 hours cutting to get to the correct shape. To get the correct shape on this, it's about using feathers that are hackled around the shank, using first smaller feathers, then bigger and bigger and bigger, and that way you create a taper. And underneath the feathers, I'll be using synthetic fibers or chenilles, which is like a flashy material that you just wind around the shank, and that's going to be behind the feather, just pushing it upwards and helping create and maintain a good profile of the fly. So this taper of different sizes of shanks will help it kind of accelerate and just flutter the tail. This one I'm showing here is just synthetics and feathers. I have a different one here that's done with a cut deer hair head. This is actually the head from one of my flies called the ragdolly, which has flat cuts on top and bottom and also on the sides. This gets pushed around a lot, both in still water or on the coast, but also fish it quite a lot or a lot in rivers, and creates a great movement in the fly. So I'll be adding one of those heads to this Feather Gamechanger that I will be doing today. The plan is to do a gray or like Grizzly gray using these Whiting Freshwater streamer saddles, which has shorter feathers here, a little bit longer and wider in the back, which allow me to create that taper that I was talking about. So for the tail, I'll be using the also from Whiting. This is called an American hackle. This is the neck or the cape of the bird, and I'll be using some of the shorter, stiffer feathers here, probably 6 or 8 of those, splayed out, kind of like this tail, because that flutters beautifully in the water. I like it, and it's good to have that little stiffness in the tail as well. I like it. And since I will be using this fly in particular mostly for sea-run browns, one of the colors that's for me has been really productive is something like with a grayish, pink, and some white is just very good for my area. But you can of course vary this and put other colors in it, depending on what your fish are eating, because this is a type of fly that can throw for basically any predatory fish. But as I said, not my pattern, but I like it and I enjoy tying it, even though it's a lot of repetition, as you will see. But it's really cool. So let's go. So for the back part of this fly, I will be starting with a 1mm shank. It's probably too small for you to see, but I will take a plier first and just bend it open. And this is because it makes it a lot easier to get into your fly tying vise. Kind of like that. And then I'm going to start my thread. I'm using a UTC 140 thread, just nylon, classic stuff, in some very hot fluorescent pink. So, for the tail, just going to start by picking out some feathers here. It's 4 good ones. And that's 4 more. I tend to tie these in kind of randomly, but what I want to make sure is I line them up so I get the same length. And I do that just by just placing them side by side and pulling it up and see if I need to do any correction. That's almost good enough. That's too short. All right, so something like that. Well, what I will do now, since I got it reasonably the same length here, I'm going to grab it with my left hand and just cut those ends off and just get some of that junk away. Then we're just going to start tying in the feathers around the hook to get that. I'm going to look for the curvature. There's a very slight curvature in these feathers, so it won't be a big thing. But I'm going to tie them in around the hook using about 2 or 3 turns per feather when I first do it. We're going to lock it in with more thread wraps later on. So I'm placing these so that they cover a gap that the previous feather didn't. It's going to be a lot of feathers, but it looks pretty in the water, so I think it's worth it. Some stray fibers there. All right. Squeeze those in there. So that's 8. You can use fewer if you want as well. Now I'm going to be locking these in, so putting all the pressure I dare before onto the ends of that feather. So yeah, sticks, good. Close the hook eye and wrap up a little bit. Now I'm going to be using a small feather on this freshwater streamer cape, or saddle, sorry. What I'm looking for is something that's somewhat slim, It has some webbiness to it. So I'm going to be using just a part of that feather. I'm just going to wrap this around this shank pretty tightly. And I'm perfectly okay if some of these fluffy stuff gets on there as well. It just moves nice in the water anyway. I don't mind that at all. Then this is the kind of tricky part. So I locked those in with a couple of revs or one. And now we'll be trying to fold this whole thing back here and work my thread backwards over the very end of that feather. That will keep it locked in and secure very tightly. Then you can just grab the end of that grizzly feather and pop it off. So that covers the tie-in of the tail feathers nicely. So from here, you can just go ahead and do a little whip finish or a couple of half hitches, whatever you prefer. Make sure you tighten the knot and snip it off. Secure this with a little bit of UV resin. Now we can cut away that part that I bent to get it into the vise by using it. All right, so that's our tail. Okay. Next up, this is a size 10 SA 280 from Ahrex. I'm going to start up here at the front, and here I got some wire, but you can also use mono because this is just to attach the tail to this small stinger hook or trailing hook that we will be using. Just cut it a little bit long and trim it to size later. Tail through there, and then a couple of wraps to make sure it's straight, and then lock it down with a few more wraps. And trim the excess. Always have to be careful when you're tying and when you're cutting wire, and when you go ahead and cover it with your thread. It's so easy to just cut the thread with those ends of the wire, but we're fine. You can see already that this tail wants to really move, and that's a good thing. It will be swimming in the water. Next step. Polymer chenille. This is fluorescent pink in size small, and I will be tying it at the back and just quite tightly, just wrapping forward, leaving a little bit of the front part of the hook free for tying in some feathers. So this will support the feathers a little bit, and also will give it a little bit of a pink flash from the inside of the fly, which is something that looks really cool in the water. So we're going to be looking at some feathers again, and some medium thickness. I think this will be peachy. Oh yeah, perfect. So I'm going to be needing a little bit longer for this I'm going to be adding more and more feathers as I go from the back to the front, just to get that taper and more thickness towards the head of the fly. You see there that I just folded it back and cut to get that triangle. That will be my tying point. So I'm tie that in and work my way up to the eye of the hook. And from here I can just go ahead and wind that hack along there. Every now and then you just want to stroke those fibers back. And again, I don't mind that fluff. So I got one thread wrap on top of that feather, fold everything back and try and work backwards over that folded feather. That will make sure that everything is really locked in. And from here you can just go ahead and do a whip finish. And tighten. No, I don't want to cut this. And this, since it's folded backward, you can, if you pull it this way, it will just pop off. You don't have to worry about that. Secure that. All right. Excellent. Looks orange. Cool. Next up, 15mm shank. A little pro tip, I guess, for attaching the shanks. Leave the hook in the vise. Use a scissor, and you can open it up this way and just pop it in. Super easy. From there you can just stick it in the vise. You see I got this tail and back hook flopping around back here. One thing I find easier is just to angle my vise slightly upwards, lower the shank slightly, and I got these small magnets. Put those there so this will stay in place. A little bit of water here so just to keep it out of the way and make sure it doesn't flop around. Start the thread to close that loop. I think we'll do another one with the small chenille. So attach the chenille, walk all the way forward and back to about the halfway point. And this will be wrapped as tightly as I possibly can, just to make sure I get a little bit of bulk in there. So one wrap, fold back, lock it in. Right. So I got one feather here that I picked out earlier, but I think I'm going to go with 2 feathers to make sure I get it a little bit thicker and fuller. I'm picking out another feather about similar size. Clean that up. Lay them on top of each other. Just clean up again. So now fold it out and backwards. I just want those soft, nice fibers. Pull it back and you can just cut those tips off and you get that triangle. So lock those in and start wrapping forwards carefully, and as I go, just making sure I fold everything back. So you don't get too much stray fibers. All right. It's gonna be tasty. So I got one wrap here. Very important to remain, to keep the tension on the thread as you do this. Fold back and go back up on top of those folded feathers to lock those in. You can just pop, pop, no problem. Just clean this up a little bit. while not crowding the hook eye. All right, whip finish. As you see, there's a lot of repetition here. So, well, what I'll be doing now is securing the thread wraps here, and I'll be tying in another shank that is going to be slightly longer, 20 millimeters. But I'm going to be doing it in the same way as I did here. So next up, 20 millimeter shank. Open it up using the scissor. Oh. Pop it in the vise. Then a bit of water just to keep those under control. Now we're switching to a size medium polymer chenille. And about halfway. And I'm going to be wrapping these pretty tight, like touching turns, so they're very close to each other. This is also to build a little bit of bulk as I go forward in the fly. Somewhere around there. One wrap, fold back, lock down. Now I'm going to be picking out an even wider feather. Probably going to do 3, just to make sure I get it thicker, going from tail to head. Line those up. Fold everything forward that you don't need. Tying these in with a lot of thread pressure, just to make sure it sticks, and close that eye right up there. All right. So, one wrap, hold on to those 3 feathers and push them back and lock them in too. Just pour some thread on here and make sure to lock everything in and pop those off. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Tasty. So, you can already see that it's starting to build a good taper, and it's gonna be moving. Very cool. Cool pattern. So now I'm popping a size 1 Ahrex hooks SA 280 into the vise and touching the thread right up at the hook eye. Gonna be cutting a piece of wire and thread the wire through here. Giving me a noose there, making sure the hook that's in the very back here is pointing down. Sorry, Actually want a thread base for this and start at the back. So I'm just going to be wrapping backwards. Don't have to be touching turns, but you have to give it something to hold on to. Right, making sure that this little loop here is horizontal, no, vertical, vertical. So I just grab it between my index finger and my thumb. Do a 2 or 3 wraps here, and I can check it, and it's straight. Then you can lock it in with harder thread pressure, and then start wrapping forward. And on a longer shank hook, like on a regular streamer hook, where you've got a lot of hook shank to tie the wire onto, I would probably not fold it back. But on these very short shank hooks, I tend to do it this way, just to make sure I don't get any wire slippage, especially when we're fishing for really like big brown trout, the really big brown trouts, or whatever you might be throwing it for. So I tend to double it back, just to have a little bit of extra safety, since you've got a shorter area to stick to. If this front hook were longer, I would probably not be doing that. But let's start it. Some polymer chenille again at the back, and I will be wrapping this very tightly, but not for that long, just 1/4 of an inch, something like that. One turn, fold back, lock it in. Fluff that up a bit. Some more feathers. Moving on to the very back to get those wide, soft, nice feathers. And I'm probably going to be using 3 in this step and another 3 further up front in the fly. Ooh. All right. What I do here is line up the fluffy part, because I don't want to go too far into that. I just want to use the part of the feathers that's closest to it. All right, now we got them lined up like that, and cut the tips and tie this in. And wrap these pretty tightly in the back here. Ooh, I have to use a dummy needle, or in my case a scissor at times when doing this, because it's so easy when you're wrapping 3 feathers at once that you catch some fibers. Oh, wow. Now it's starting to look better. Same thing, fold back. Yep. A little bit more of this polymer chenille, just a few wraps. Just to help push that profile just a little bit more. That, more feathers. We're going to be going for the longest and widest, biggest feathers we can find in the very back of this saddle. I think 3 will be enough. So cleaning this up and making sure that they stay like flat on top of each other. And I got a tidy little tie-in point and cut that triangle again. It's harder to see when there's 3 feathers, but it's there. Lock that in. All right. Unwrap. As you do this one wrap, it's super important just to keep the pressure on the thread, otherwise it will just unwind and be horrible. All right, pop those out. So, a lot of feathers, and I think the original calls for hen feathers. I think that's very common, and they tie in like 5 or 9 feathers per step. But I think this freshwater streamer capes are fantastic for this. So it's pretty easy to find feathers that creates a very good taper. So I'll try and show you now before I put a head on it. So you can see it's pretty nicely tapered, thicker up front and narrower in the back. So what I'm going to do now is add a deer hair head on that one, very similar to this, just because I like it and it swims fantastic. But I'm going to do a little bit smaller, since it's a slightly smaller fly. So what I will be adding now is deer hair in gray to match the body of the fly. All right, I'm going to start off with just a small drop of super glue on the free part of the hook shank there, and add some GSP or Dyneema thread. A couple of wraps just to get it attached, and that glue is just to make sure that the GSP, that's a very, very, very strong thread, but it's slippery. So I usually add just a touch of super glue to make sure it sticks there. So the plan here is just to do a solid color gray head. So I'm going to be using the same color of this deer here on both the bottom part and the top part. But you can obviously use the same techniques as I'm going to be showing you now for stacking colors on the top and on the bottom and making it like a white and a gray or whatever you want. And of course to match other colors. And you can use this on a lot of other flies as well. This head style that I will be doing right now is exactly the same as I use on one of my other streamers, or my streamers to be exact. This is Blaine's pattern, but I'm gonna put a ragdolly head on it. So clean out some of that yunk in the bottom. It's just some underfur that's naturally occurring on the deer to keep it warm. So clean that out. I'm gonna measure so the tips reaches, hook point plus minus a little bit. Hold the deer hair over the top of the hook shank. 1 loose wrap, 2 loose wrap. Just bring it down slowly and reach around with thumb and index finger and pull straight down firmly, keeping the tension of the thread. Spin that vise around and complete the wrap. And let's zoom in here, and you can see that this is just bare hook. So we got all the deer hair on the bottom side. So if you were to be doing a two-color, two-tone head, that's what you want. All right, so a small touch of super glue here too, just to lock that thread pressure in. And a little bit more deer hair for the top part. So what I'm doing is just grabbing a hold of the tip section, pulling out first the bigger under fur fibers, and then coming in with a comb and just make sure I got it all. Quite a big clump if you want a tight head, which I do, because if you have a tighter deer hair head, you can trim it. It gives you options in how you want to trim the head to get whatever type of action or shape you want. And it's actually a lot easier to trim a tight head than a loosely tight head. What I did here was just hold the deer hair on top of the hook shank, 2 loose wraps. Then I'm going to be taking my thumb and index finger, holding on to the back part, just behind the thread, and pull down. That will make this top half of the deer hair, or the head, stay on top. So I'm keeping the pressure now. I'm just starting to fold everything back. And then I'm going to just wiggle through the deer hair to find the hook eye. Keep the pressure, fold the bottom side away as well, and throw in a couple of wraps there. And this is important because there's no stretch in this thread. So if you don't keep that pressure, we'll just kind of loosen the head and we'll make it a lot less durable. We're going to finish it off now, and I'm just going to try and do a regular whip finish on here. But you need to fold it back. So I'm just going to use my fingers like so and try and find the hook eye. And you kind of have to be a little bit sneaky with the thread and wiggle through, but you'll get it. All right, we've got a lot of loose thread here. So in the second part of the whip finish, when using these modern super threads that's super strong, is that you have to tighten the knot. You'll feel it cinch down and just set. So you have to give it a good pull after you're done the whip finish. You can't just do it like you do with a nylon thread and get a little bit of a pull, but just a good pull, and you'll feel that thread settle down and dig in. You got a lot more of a durable and strong knot that way. That's just because this thread is, as I said, no stretch, and it's slippery. So make sure to tighten it down. Right, so it's time to put some shape into this and cut it. So what I do when I'm going to form a deer hair head out of this furry ball of hair is I usually put the vise just like that, and I always start at the bottom. So I'm going to try and make sure that I got the vise perfectly flat, and also checking the hook eye. The hook eye will be my kind of gauge or ruler. So the first cut is going to be a flat cut going slightly upwards on the bottom here. It's going to look like this. I'm going to place the edge of the razor blade on the hook eye and just carefully cut just like that. And I can trim off a little bit more at this stage. All right, so I want a flat surface here, and I'm going to flip it around. And I actually have this little thing to make sure it's straight as well. Next cut will be at a slightly higher angle, like that, just because I want a little bit more material on top. Just make a straight cut, like that, upwards. And then flip it on the side, checking that the vise is flat. And again, starting at the hook eye. And this cut is going to be almost straight back, slightly upwards. Just like that. And then the same on this side, very slightly upwards, mostly following the direction of the hook shank. Starting at the hook eye, I always lean this part of the razor blade into the hook eye and just go back like that. So from here I can just switch it back to this position, make sure everything looks good. Sure it's even. You can have a look from the top and see if it's even. Looks pretty good. I will make just a slightly deeper cut on the bottom, just like that. That's pretty much the shape I'm looking for. So kind of a bulky head. I cut more on the bottom just to make sure I got enough hook gap here to make sure I got this very sticky point free to get positive hookups to whatever fish wants to bite it. All right, so from here, I'm just gonna attach a pair of eyes. Needing the scissors just to press the eyes into the deer here. So for this this type of head, you want to use a gel type super glue. So I'm just gonna place a small drop on this side and on that side. Take some fly dressing ice here, some pearl ones with a pupil. So I'm laying it flat here now just because it's easier for me to just carefully place it on top of that drop, but I'm not going to be putting any pressure on it just yet. So very carefully grab it like that and just almost just drop it on top of the glue there, and just use the scissor to press it down. Don't be worried at all if the glue kind of floats out around the eye. We'll just secure it a little bit better. Now we're smoothing that out in just a second. So I got that. I'm just going to use my finger to make it smooth there. That will stay on there. So that's just one eye, but that's good. Just always finish one eye at a time, and that way you can just adjust the other eye to make sure that they're in the same spot on both sides. So very carefully just place the eye on the glue. Have a look from the top. No, it's too far back. You can adjust like that. That looks better. It's right in the middle. Then I'm going to use just the tip of my scissors to press it down. Check it again. Needs to be a little bit further back so I can give it a slight push. Perfect. And then just put some pressure on it for just a second or two. So just smooth that out. Perfect. Those eyes will stick on there and they're straight. At least reasonably straight. Now it's really good. Just to clean this up a little bit and make it look better, you can use one of these cauterizing tools. It smells horrible, but we'll just clean up around the hook eye and make it look a little bit more pretty. It's not super important. And be careful not to keep it there for too long. That's tasty. Something like that. So that big head up front there will just push water, and the flat sides on top, on the bottom, and on the sides will just hit the water and make it just swim and do fun, crazy stuff that fish eat. That would be my version of Blaine Chocolate's Gamechanger. And if you want a chance at winning this fly, write something cool in the comments on why you should get this fly, and good luck!